Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Call of Duty Ghosts for PC, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and Wii U. This is a first-person shooter and the 10th main game in the Call of Duty franchise. It was developed by Infinity Ward with additional work by Neversoft and Raven Software, and published by Activision in November of 2013. And this is one of those games where you might be going, but DW, it's the 2013 Call of Duty, basically nobody's playing it anymore, why are you giving a crap about this? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first of which being, I managed to get it for really cheap, so obviously I was going to pick it up and review it at least. And I've planned on reviewing the other Call of Duty games just because they are one of the biggest releases of every single year that they come out. But here's the thing. Call of Duty Ghosts is a bit special as far as the franchise is concerned because it's a great cautionary tale. And I'll get more into that when I get to the story and the gameplay. But suffice to say, I believe a big lesson can be learned from Call of Duty Ghosts, even though most Call of Duty players either stuck with the prior ones or moved on to Advanced Warfare and eventually Black Ops 3 when they came out. But to say reviewing Call of Duty Ghosts is either worthless or an exercise in futility ignores a very significant truth. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Now with that in mind, let's go ahead and delve right into this thing. Now as I talk about the presentation, it is important to keep in mind that this was a transitionary game. And by that I mean it was during the transition between the old generation of consoles, Xbox 360 and PS3, to the new generation, Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And in this transition, they tried to pass this off as a true next-gen game, and they didn't exactly succeed very well with that, particularly considering the game doesn't really look all that different in terms of its visuals from Black Ops 2, or certainly other games prior to Black Ops 2 even. Going back as far as, say, Modern Warfare 3, for example, it doesn't look that much better. There are certainly improvements, don't get me wrong. I mean, they threw in a lot of tessellation this time around. They have some PhysX support if you're playing it on PC. They have things like fluid dynamics and interactive smoke. And so it does have some decent effects going with it that weren't available in prior incarnations of Call of Duty. But it's more of an incremental improvement than a generational one. And so what ended up happening was Call of Duty Ghosts came out and people looked at it and went, this is true next gen? Hey guys, didn't you see that game over there called Battlefield 4? It looks way better than this. Now that's not to say that Call of Duty Ghosts looks terrible or anything, it just looks average. And people were expecting a bit more out of it. Instead, they pretty much just rehashed the same engine with a lot of the same assets, and it really does show at times, because there are some new things that they put together for the newer version of the engine that just clash horribly with the old stuff. Some of the old set dressing, for example, just isn't quite as high quality as the stuff you see that was specifically built for Ghosts. But other than that, the game looks mostly fine, other than the whole brown and gray and realistic kind of crap that they've been pulling for many years now. And similarly, there's nothing really outright bad about the sound design. It's just that it's average at best and mediocre at worst. I mean, a lot of the weapon sounds just are pathetic, frankly. I mean, the revolver sound, for example. It's a .44 Magnum. It doesn't really sound like a hand cannon, not the way it really should, honestly. Or the assault rifles, which all pretty much sound the same and don't sound realistic whatsoever. It's just that they could have done so much better with the sound effects than they actually did, and it ends up coming across as kind of cheap and lazy as a result. Same thing goes for the music. It feels like a rehash of Modern Warfare 2 for the most part, which means you have some guitar and a lot of orchestral sounding stuff, which takes a lot after what we saw with the soundtrack for Modern Warfare 2, and thus we end up feeling like it's just a continuation of that music rather than its own identity, which is kind of a shame considering that Ghost is supposed to be the start of a new franchise within Call of Duty's mega franchise, I guess is the way to say it. And then there's the voice acting, which I don't really have any complaints about, honestly. The actors do a decent enough job, it's just that what they're saying isn't interesting. Of course, that means they did what they could with what they had, it's just what they had was table scraps at best, frankly. So while the overall sound design isn't necessarily bad, it's just bland and uninteresting, only occasionally moving beyond that. But it's ultimately the story and the gameplay that matter here, and where do I begin? I guess I start with the fact that Call of Duty Ghosts is a very strange specimen as far as the Call of Duty series goes. A lot of people like to chalk up the last several games in the series as, oh, it's just another Call of Duty game, they're all the same. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, you can see quite often in Ghosts where they tried to do things a bit differently. Now, this is most obvious with the multiplayer component, but I'll get to that in a moment. Let's first talk about the single player, where it's set in the near future where the Middle East no longer controls the oil production of the world, sort of, and the oil-producing countries in South America have risen to prominence and banded together as the Federation of the Americas, and became very swift, very powerful conquerors, going all the way up through Mexico, and eventually clashing with the U.S. The only thing that would actually keep the U.S. and the Federation in a sort of stalemate at that point was the fact that the U.S. had a super weapon in space, it was orbiting the planet, called Odin, and the Federation manages to infiltrate that and turn it against the U.S., which in turn leads to another war that turns into a brutal stalemate where there's all sorts of fighting along the lines of the southwestern U.S., where the Federation is trying to push in and the U.S. is trying to keep what ground it still has. It is into this environment that you are placed into the shoes of Logan Walker, who, along with his brother Hesh and his father Elias, managed to barely escape the destruction of their hometown of San Diego. And then it does a time skip to 10 years later when the wars hit its stalemate period and the brothers are now part of a special forces unit under the command of Elias. And eventually they come across a member of the ultra-elite Ghosts, being interrogated by a guy named Rourke. And this is where the real story of the game begins and where the real problems of it begin. Because they had an actually interesting setup. They could have given us the perspective of a soldier on the front lines of a basically losing battle against a massive invasion force and just trying to keep his country alive. But instead what we get is this story about Rourke and the Ghosts. Now, to understand why this is a problem, first you have to understand what the Ghosts are themselves. They are a small number of survivors of a particular special forces operation who are so absurdly badass that their enemies basically describe them as inhuman, aka ghosts. So right from the start, the premise of the Ghosts themselves is completely and utterly ridiculous. And then there's the actual plot involving Rourke and the Ghosts. You see, Rourke was originally one of the Ghosts, but then he was captured by the Federation and brainwashed to go up against them and basically seek revenge on the Ghosts for leaving him when there was basically no other option for it. And eventually, the whole US versus Federation thing fades into the background and becomes completely unimportant when it's all really about Rourke. And so ultimately, despite trying to do something a bit more akin to what happened in the really best parts of Modern Warfare 2, where you were fighting the defensive against an overwhelming force, they decided to go the Modern Warfare 3 route and make it entirely a personal revenge story without any regard to what is going on around these various characters. Because obviously you wouldn't care about what happens to your average soldier in such a devastating conflict, or the state of the world in such a conflict. I mean, what's going on with Europe and Asia? What are they doing while this entire thing is happening over in the Americas? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I would be far more interested to play through the rather melancholy story of a soldier fighting a losing battle than having to spend the entire game tracking down Rourke because he is the bad guy and there's nothing else that matters. So the plot ends up being a complete farce. And more importantly, it basically breaks the illusion of power fantasy. See, Call of Duty, basically since Modern Warfare 2, has been about nothing but power fantasy. And when you get to Ghosts, they tried to take it in such a ridiculous way that it actually becomes boring. So even though you do get quite a variety of things to do during the campaign, and it does shake things up a bit by, for example, giving you control over the dog Riley in some parts, or giving you control over a helicopter at one point, and things like that, you can't really get invested in anything. You see, in Black Ops, you could get invested in things because it was just completely ridiculous and it rolled with it. You could get invested in Modern Warfare 2, at least in certain parts, because, hey, the Russians are invading. But Ghosts takes more after Modern Warfare 3 in this regard, where there's basically no reason to get invested in the story. You're playing a character who you know basically nothing about. He is a speechless protagonist who is basically there to be player one. And while there's nothing wrong with the protagonist simply being player one, the game takes itself so incredibly seriously and is utterly convinced of its own magnificence that it really just becomes little more than a series of super ridiculous action set pieces that seem like they're straight out of a Michael Bay movie, without doing anything to really keep you tethered. And so, when this thing is constantly spouting off its more elite than elite bullshit, you don't care. And when it's doing all these over-the-top action set pieces where there's tons of things exploding and massive deformation to the terrain and everything like that, even though it's impressive to look at, there's no real impact behind it. And the campaign just falls completely flat on its face as a result. It also doesn't help that when you play the single player, your FOV is locked to 65, which, as you guys know, makes me nauseous. So the entire time you're having to put up with the game's inane bullshit that it is utterly convinced is masterful, you're also having to put up with a headache-inducing at best and nauseating at worst FOV, and you're ultimately just doing more of the same kind of things you did in the previous Call of Duty games, even though they do try to spice things up. And so the campaign is ultimately not worth bothering with. But then I hear you going, oh, well, Call of Duty hasn't really been about the campaigns for quite a long time now. You're right. And in this case, that's a good thing, because if we were judging this solely on the campaign, it would be infuriating, partly because the campaign is just so inane, and partly because the way it ends just makes you go, really? You guys are doing this? Blatant cliffhanger ending? Come on! So it ultimately falls to the multiplayer to bring things up, and there's a lot on offer here. You do have your standard multiplayer mode, where you just go into the online and do create a class, you level up, you get unlocks, you just mow people down left, right, and center. You have a variety of modes available, of course, but unfortunately, because this game is so incredibly unpopular on PC, there's about 300 to 600 players online at any given point, and pretty much all of them are playing Team Deathmatch, so good luck getting into anything but a TDM. And I'm just talking a standard TDM, not a hardcore TDM, just a plain old TDM. And that's pretty much the Call of Duty experience you've come to know and either love or hate or somewhere in between, but with a series of tweaks made to it. For example, it is no longer create a class, it is create a soldier, where you can, for the first time in the entire series, pick a female character to play in the multiplayer, and you can customize their appearance with various uniforms, headgear, and, of course, faces. And you can unlock these by simply playing through the multiplayer and the other modes, so it does provide you some incentives for playing around with various things and trying different things. And this new Create a Soldier system ties in directly with the new Squads mode, where you can create a squad of these various soldiers and then take them online to do various missions, whether it simply be a TDM against another created squad, or you can go into things like a horde mode, for example, and try to survive as the squad. Now, you can either do this as solo with AI bots to fill in the gaps, or you can do it multiplayer with a party or otherwise. And while the idea itself is actually very interesting, and I would love to see how it would play out in an ideal circumstance, the reality is that apparently not that many people actually bothered with the squads mode, probably in part because you tend to spend all of your unlocks and such on the actual multiplayer component, rather than trying to put together a squad where every character has to unlock weapons individually and such like that. After all, you do unlock all of the weapons and attachments and such like that using squad points, which are also used to unlock squad slots that you can create new soldiers with, and then you have to spend the squad points to give them the various weapons and such that you've unlocked already on your primary character, which seems like quite a bit of a waste, really, because you don't really earn all that many squad points per match. You usually earn somewhere between 2 and 5, and it can take up to about 10 or more sometimes to unlock various things. Squad slots eventually start getting into the 20 plus range, and let's face it, you'd much rather unlock all of the weapons and the attachments and such like that than you would unlock various squad slots for characters you're never going to bother with. So it's one of those things where the implementation ultimately kills it, although it is still a pretty cool idea, and I, again, would love to see it work in an ideal circumstance as opposed to the non-functioning circumstance that I managed to find with this thing. The other multiplayer mode that you get is Extinction Mode, which can basically be described as Zombies mode, Call of Duty Ghosts Edition. Instead of zombies, it's aliens, and you basically go from location to location, holding off hordes of aliens as they come in to just wreck your day and mess up your objectives and such. You earn money by killing aliens and completing objectives and such like that, and you can scavenge up various items all over the map that will either give you money, or types of ammo, or just extra ammo, or attachments for your various weapons. You can find weapons scattered throughout the map, and then just run up to those and purchase them, and you'll be able to use them. And each character has various abilities that you can use to help you out. Things like setting down an IMS, a munition system that launches explosives at the various aliens automatically. Or you can get things like ammo to drop for teammates and such. The problem with that is that you do need to unlock these things based on your rank, and your rank in Extinction Mode is exclusive to Extinction Mode. So, unfortunately, you have to just grind through the levels in order to be able to unlock the various character types, as well as the various sidearms that you can get. You start out with P226, and it's terrible in the context of the Extinction Mode, so you'll obviously want to upgrade that as soon as possible, and unfortunately you don't get to unlock a new sidearm until several levels in, and it takes quite a while to level up in the Extinction Mode. So you definitely have to play quite a bit of it before it really started to give you a return on investment, and that's not a very good way to do a multiplayer mode. I mean, if you boot up Zombies mode in the Treyarch Call of Duty games, you just hop right in and you play it. It's not that big of a deal. You gradually progress as you're playing the match, not as you are having this kind of persistent level thing that Extinction has. And ultimately, Extinction Mode just ends up being incredibly boring as a result. I'm sure it's better with friends, but good luck getting people to play Call of Duty Ghosts with you. Let's put it that way. Now, all that said, I basically just described the campaign as horrible, the multiplayer component as mostly the same as it's always been, the Extinction Mode as straight up boring, and the squad mode as an interesting idea but very poorly implemented. But if it were just all that, people wouldn't be describing Call of Duty Ghosts as a terrible game. They'd describe it as really a mediocre game and just kind of leave it at that. But there are a few things that straight up killed this game, and it's kind of a shame because they were onto something here. Believe it or not, there are some good things about Call of Duty Ghosts. In fact, there are some really good things about it compared to other Call of Duty games. The Create a Soldier system, for example, is actually a pretty good system, believe it or not. It clearly took a page from Black Ops 2's book where they used a pick 10 system where you had 10 points that you could use to get all sorts of different things like weapons, perks, you could get the various grenades that you could throw around, and you could pick and choose what exactly you wanted to carry. If you wanted a very specific build that is purely around the primary weapon, you can get rid of the secondary weapon entirely and use as many points as you can to actually build up that primary weapon. You can do something very similar with Ghosts in that you are given a point allotment that you can spend to set up the class the way you want it to be. But it's a bit different in that the main thing you unlock with ranks, the levels in the game, are perks. Not weapons, not attachments for your weapons by leveling the weapons up. No, just perks. And when you go to get the various weapons, they cost squad points. And all of them are available to you from the get-go. You can pick whatever weapon you want as long as you have the squad points to purchase it. Now you do have to purchase it for every single one of your soldiers individually, but when you purchase it for that soldier, the squad points are subtracted from your total, and you now have permanent access to that weapon on that particular soldier. Attachments work the same way. It's on a by weapon basis, but you spend squad points to unlock them, and you can unlock any of them from the get-go. I really like that system. It is great compared to the stupid rank-based unlock system that we've had in the past. In fact, this basically takes what Black Ops 1 did, where you had the points that you would spend to buy the various weapons, but you had to unlock them by level first. It takes that system and improves it. The new system is a great idea. It's just that a lot of what they threw in there didn't necessarily work. The perks, for example. There is a ludicrous number of perks in this game, and you unlock them by level, as I said, and not all of them are useful. There's ones that just give you more ammo. There's ones that give you more tactical or lethal grenades. And let's face it, you're probably never going to use at least half of the perks in this thing, no matter what your class build is. In fact, you're always going to pick one of the perks, and that's the one that reduces flinch, and I'll get to that in a moment. But really, what brings the perk system down, despite it being interesting the way they've set it up and giving you plenty of options, is the fact that most of the perks are really not that useful. You're going to stick with a handful of them, and just that's it. At least with the perks, you don't have to spend squad points to unlock them. They're just automatically unlocked as you rank up. So like I said, you can see where they saw what was going wrong with previous Call of Duty games, and they're like, okay, let's fix that. And they tried something, and in some ways it works, in other ways it doesn't. Same thing goes for the score streaks. Once again, you have the 3 packages available to you. You have Assault, Support, and the Specialist package. This is from Modern Warfare 3, where they had each of these and they all behave differently. But they're all score streaks still, and they behave in pretty much the same way. Again, this is a good idea. It gives you plenty of options instead of making it basically all stuff to just blast the enemy team into submission with. And it still carries that risk-reward basis with regards to the Assault and Specialist score streak systems, where your score streaks reset once you die. The Support package, your score streaks don't reset, so you can continue earning points, and the thing about the Support class is that they built it around helping your team out as opposed to just getting more kills. There are things in there that will get you more kills, sure, but generally speaking, it's more about giving more stuff to your team, and that is a good thing. Of course, in practice, most people either use the Assault streaks or they get the lethals that are available in the Support, and they just kind of roll with that. But again, good idea, somewhat weak implementation. I really do think they could fix that somehow if they managed to make all of the support stuff really useful for your team and really did improve the risk-reward basis for the Assault class and the Specialist class. But regardless of the well-intentioned changes to the formula, ultimately it's the things they changed slightly and the things that they didn't change that really messed the game up beyond redemption. The slight change to the movement system isn't really worth noting all that much. They added the ability to slide by sprinting and then holding down the crouch button so you'd slide into a crouch position. They made transitioning over smaller obstacles a lot smoother and with the ability to continue firing while you were moving over them, so that's greatly appreciated. It's kind of twitchy sometimes though, so that is something to keep in mind. And they also added in the cover system where you can move up to an object in the game world, like for example a pillar. And if you go up to the pillar and you go to certain sides of the pillar, then you can hold the aim button and you will lean out around the pillar and you will be able to shoot at things from a leaning position. It ultimately just doesn't work very well. I mean, half the time it doesn't even trigger. And when it does actually trigger, it's for way too narrow of an angle, so you can't really use it effectively. But these are simply mild annoyances at worst, really. What really break the game are the fact that it is peer-to-peer in matchmaking, the changes to the flinching mechanics, and the map design. The flinching in this game is now off the charts. You get hit once, you're basically aiming at the sky now. and it's basically impossible to stay on target if somebody's also shooting at you. So whoever gets the first hit in is probably going to win the gunfight. That's the way it's always been, but there's always been a chance to get in a nice quick headshot or something like that. Now it's pretty much impossible unless you have the perk that allows you to reduce flinching, and you unlock that at rank 30. So that's really not much of a solution in the long run, and that is one of the things that just drives me completely insane when I'm playing multiplayer. The peer-to-peer and matchmaking bit is pretty self-explanatory. You end up with really terrible connections with tons of lag. Connections drop all the time. These days it's actually hard to find full games. You can get nearly full games, but not completely full games a lot of the time. Sometimes you can't even find a game at all. It's just a complete mess, and I'm still completely baffled as to why they seem to think it's a good idea. The Black Ops series has had dedicated servers since day one, so at least even with the matchmaking that they've had those that have pretty much stabilized the connections. Another fun thing about Ghosts, they don't let you see your ping. You go to the scoreboard and it only shows your KD ratio, basically. You don't get any indication of how good or bad your connection is. So you have to learn the hard way by how long it takes your hits to register, if they register at all. Come on, Infinity Ward, this is just disgraceful. But even if you do manage to get into a game with a pretty good connection, you find that the map design in this game is horrible. A lot of people complain that the maps in previous Call of Duty games were way too small. And in some cases they were right. Some of those maps were ludicrously small and they led to you just dying very quickly and respawning and then dying very quickly again. Got a very, very vicious cycle. Ghosts, on the other hand, decided to open up the maps a bit more and make them bigger. At the same time, they made them a lot more convoluted. And so you're basically constantly dying from angles that you didn't see and from people who are just kind of sitting in the corner camping. In fact, camping is more rampant in Ghosts than it is in any of the other Call of Duty games, and it's pretty infuriating. So is running around the map without finding a single enemy even in a nearly full game or an outright full game. It's actually kind of baffling how badly they screwed that up, considering they had so much experience with multiplayer Call of Duty maps at this point. But then again, not a single Call of Duty since Modern Warfare 2 has fixed any of the spawn problems that the series has been plagued with, Ghosts included, of course. So, I guess that speaks volumes, really. And then there's the technical problems. On launch, this thing was barely playable at best on PC. Now it's playable, they ironed out most of the catastrophic issues, but it's still got quite a few bugs and glitches in it, including one that basically rendered the single player unplayable, where it would just render everything horribly wrong and you get all sorts of weird colors and basically artifacting, even though it wasn't really artifacting. And I have a clip here to show you of it, but I can't really describe it very well. It's just one of those things you better see than hear about. But it basically rendered the single player unplayable, and I'd have to restart entire missions just because of it. And I don't know what caused it. Sometimes the game would work, sometimes it wouldn't, and I'd have to restart a mission. And that got very tiresome very quickly. And ultimately all this put together is why I consider Ghosts a cautionary tale. It's not simply a bad Call of Duty game. It's a prime example of why you should not give in to hype culture and why you should never pre-order anything. The game was all about promise. The promise of a new generation of Call of Duty. It promised more. It promised better. It promised cutting-edge technology even though the technology was nowhere near cutting edge. And yet what we got was a fairly paint-by-numbers modern military shooter with fairly good ideas in a lot of its mechanics, just that weren't implemented very well. So what changes it did make to the formula were either not very well received or completely disregarded because certain issues were so incredibly glaring that they ruined the game experience. And I think that's what's most depressing about Ghosts. It could have been something really great. But it's hard to really pinpoint what exactly went wrong to squander all of that potential. Why they made some of these really baffling decisions when they started out actually pretty strong. Who knows what went on behind the scenes to make this thing as ultimately crappy as it ended up being. But the end product isn't about what could have been. It's about what is. And what we have here is a bad game. I just hope you learn from Ghost's example rather than simply write it off as, oh, it's a Call of Duty game, therefore it's crap, or writing it off as just another Call of Duty game or something like that. It's not completely worthless in and of itself. It's just not worth your money. I give it a 1.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.